Testing 1, 2, 3. All right. Good morning. Good morning. A beautiful, chilly January. I'm ready for August again. I'm ready for August. So good to see. We got an overflowing crowd. We do have some chairs in the far right. No more far left. And so that's not a political statement, okay? And so we have a few chairs here. We do have a crowd because that's our office right there. That's our office over there. And so is Carissa in here? Carissa's in the office. Everybody say, hi, Carissa. Hi, Carissa. Say, hi, Mary Lee. Hi, Mary Lee. Okay, so we just want them to know we're here. I think they know we're here for some reason. I think they know we're here. All right, so we're glad you're here. So this may be the last week of my Jersey thing. Last week when the New Orleans Saints, they played their best games for last, but there was between them and 6 teams to make the final people for the playoff, and we didn't make it. But after this weekend, I said, Lisa, do you know what the difference is between the Saints and those 6 teams that did make the playoffs? And she said, they're better. I said, no, the difference is 1 week. Because they're gone. Now we're down to, 8? No. 8 teams? 8 teams left. Now, and the reason I'm proudly wearing the Kansas City Chiefs, and of the 8 teams, this is the only shirt I have left. So my wife has forbade me to buy any more shorts. So either Kansas City has to go keep winning, or some of you need to loan me a shirt for next Tuesday if someone else wins. So we're all right. And some of you here have forbade me to start taking off clothing anymore, so I'm not going to do that. So turn to Lesson 14. Lesson 14. Today we get to look at the book of Esther. Oh, what a wonderful book. Now, Bible trivia, I'm not good at trivia. Pastor David, sometimes when I go to parties I'm with the pastor, they play Bible trivia, they would always want me on their team. I'd say, oh, don't do that. No, because some of those questions were hard. I don't know. Someone asked me what the shortest chapter in the Bible is. Anybody know? How many verses in Psalm 117? 2? All right. Oh, then, okay. So, Esther chapter 10 has 3 verses. So maybe there's one. So it was a close runner-up, though. So she says, you only talked about 3 verses in Esther 10. I got nervous. I went back. But there was only 3 verses there. So today, Esther has all the elements of a Hollywood screenplay. I mean, drama, suspense, murder, espionage. It seems like it would make a great movie, but the difference is it is not written for it to be a Hollywood movie. It's a historical account of what took place many, many years ago. It's a real-life account of the people of God who were almost exterminated from the face of the earth. You know, when you think about the Jews being exterminated, I don't like that word, but it's a harsh word, but we usually think of what? Hitler, the Holocaust. But this started a long time before that. There's always been a group of people wanting to get rid of the chosen people of God. And we're going to see this is long before Hitler and the Holocaust and communism that the Jews were almost annihilated from the face of the earth. Now, the book of Esther begins when the queen, her name was Vashti, her husband was having a royal banquet with all of his buddies and trying to show off his wealth and his power. And when they were all in high spirits, he called for his beautiful bride to come out and dance for them. Well, she didn't think it was such a good idea, and she refused to go. And now the king's buddies looked at him and said, are you going to let her treat you like that? And so not knowing what to do, he, in his pride, they asked for recommendations. So he banished her from queen, and they put a nationwide search. All the beautiful young girls of the land came and lived in the palace for a year, and then got beauty treatments and lessons on queenship and all of these things. And then one by one, they were taken to the king for time. And then if he liked them, he might bring them back another time. And the elimination came. And one of those girls was a common Jewish little girl named Esther. And she was the most beautiful of all, and the king chose her to be the next queen of the land. And that's where our story begins. Look at the introduction. Although Esther follows Nehemiah in the Bible, its events take place about 30 years prior to those recorded in Nehemiah. It is one of only 2 books named after a woman. The other is Ruth. Okay, Esther and Ruth, all right? It is unique. It's the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention the name of God, all right? The story is set in the Persian Empire, and Babylon was taken over by Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire. It was Babylon and then Persia. And most of the events of this account, this book in the Bible, takes place in the king's palace in Susa, the capital. Now, but the purpose of the book, and what I want you to hear more than anything else, and we need this in our lives as well, is to show that God is sovereign. God is in absolute control. Even when you live in a world that we think is chaos, God is in control. When your life is chaos, God is in control. When everything doesn't make sense, remember, God is in control. That's the sovereignty of God. He's got the whole world in his hands. That's what I want you to remember about Esther. Regardless of how bad things look, God is in control. So, the book of Esther records how the Hebrew race was saved from extinction. God had been careful in protecting his chosen people for centuries. Why? So that the promised Redeemer could come into the world. And so, therefore, he could not allow anyone to wipe them out. So to prevent this disaster, he raised up a woman named Esther to save his people. Her life, became the channel through which God would use to protect his people from the murderous plans of the enemy. You see, we don't see it, but God knew from the beginning of time he was going to raise up Esther. He was going to put her in a place for such a time as this. And we look at it behind, it's a coincidence. How did this work? But God is in total control of everything that takes place. A lot of people think it just happened, And so a lot of people look at the stars at night and just say, there was just a cosmic blast, and the stars fell here, and the moon fell here, and the earth got this far from the sun. Ooh, glad we're not closer. Glad we're not further away. Ooh, it's just this and that. Could it be that God designed it all ahead of time? He knew exactly how close he wanted the earth to the sun. If we were a little bit closer, we would burn up. If we were just a tiny bit further away, we would all freeze. Could it be that God is in control of all? It's the sovereignty of God. All right? Let me tell you 4 or 5 key people. Vashti was the queen of Persia who refused to dance before her husband's friends, and she was banished from the throne. Esther was the young Jewish girl who was chosen to replace Vashti as queen. And then there was Mordecai. Uncle Mordecai, he was a relative of Esther. He basically adopted her and raised her and looked out for her. And I believe the Bible teaches that he probably was the one who encouraged her to be included in the king's search and saying, Esther, you're young, you're beautiful, why don't you be included in that? Because she didn't have these aspirations of queenship or royalty, but he was her uncle, and they were very close. King Xerxes, another name is King Ahasuerus. I call him King Xerxes, depending on your translation of the Bible. He was the king of Persia who chose Esther as queen. And then Haman. Haman was the evil guy. He rose to be the chief of staff, the prime minister, the second in charge, and he plotted to exterminate the Jews. So the themes, I mentioned God's sovereignty. It's a picture of how God is in complete and total control of his world. And then no circumstance. Remember, nothing is too difficult for God. Nothing is too difficult for God. But it's also a great reminder that with God in control, we need to have courage and faith to believe that everything will work out. Maybe not how I planned, but how God planned. How about racial hatred? The Jewish people living in Persia were a minority ethnic group living in a foreign land. Now, we're going to see later, King Haman was a descendant of King Agag, an enemy of the Jews. And he had been trained to hate Jewish people. Sometimes you're instilled, maybe you grew up. Now, I grew up in the deep South, and sometimes it was ingrained. You're not supposed to like those people. You're not supposed to like these people. You're not supposed to do that, and it's ingrained in them. They hated Jewish people, and the Agagites were fierce enemies of the Jews. Now, I learned this, I believe, was it Dale told me this today, and so I don't quote me on this. If it's wrong, go to him. He said a lot of this came from back in Samuel when King Saul was told to kill all the Ammonites, and remember he said kill everybody in there, but Saul didn't. He left the king. He left a lot of descendants. He kept the sheep and the gold and that, and he went and told Samuel he had obeyed the God's commands. And remember Samuel, what then is this bleating of sheep I hear in my ear? He said he didn't fully obey God. And he was saying that those descendants came on to be the Agagites, and they became to be utter enemies of the Jews. They hated the Jews, okay? Deliverance. Although a law had been signed to exterminate all Jewish people, God raised up Esther and devised a plan to deliver the Jews from the hand of Haman. Just as God delivered the Israelites from Egypt, He delivered them from Haman, and he still delivers us today. I think if you would take time, just get out a legal pad and think back on your life when God has delivered you from the mouths of the lions, when God has delivered you from a horrible relationship, when God has delivered you from a horrible working condition. Do you follow me? God is the great deliverer. Even in the Old Testament, he delivered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fiery furnace. He delivered Daniel from the lion's den. And God can deliver you. Don't ever think that it's hopeless. God is a great deliverer. Okay? And then the fourth theme is action. Faced with a horrible predicament, Esther and Mordecai risked their lives and took a great step of faith to save their people. Whereas most people would have been afraid to act, they acted in faith, believing God was with them. As Christians today, it is not enough to know God is in control. We must act in faith and courage and go where he leads. I believe there come times in all of our lives when it's not enough just to say, I believe. You got to act. Your actions prove your belief. So many times, preacher, I believe, I don't want to get involved. You see someone on the side of the road, you pass them by, your heart says stop and help. You see an injustice being taken, and your heart says get involved. You see someone speaking falsehood or gossiping, and someone says you need to correct them. You know what's right, but you remain silent. And friends, there comes times in life where God puts you in a situation, and he doesn't want you to just know what's right. It's to stand up for what's right. I remember I took a class in college. They said it was the easy A called human sexuality. I thought it was going to be on dating, but it was on parts of the body that I didn't want to know about, right there. And I'll never forget, this was in college years ago, and I remember they started talking about abortions and things like that. And I'll never forget, I stood up and just gave my opinion that I thought it was the killing of an innocent child. And I got slammed right there by the professor and by this and how I'm out of touch with this and this, that. And after the class, 3 people came up to me and said, I just want you to know I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you. And you know what I said to them? Where were you when I needed you? That's the way a lot of Christians are. Am I right? He said, so we need to act. There's times when it's not enough just to believe. We have to act on that belief. All right, the key verse could be Esther 4:14. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Some people think that it's all about me. No, God doesn't need me. If I don't stand, he's giving me the opportunity. God can bring deliverance from anybody. Any old bush will do. Okay? He can use anybody. But if he gives you the opportunity, that's his plan for you. And it's for your blessing and your growth and your enjoyment that you get to be used of God. But if God wants to use you, you should count it a privilege and accept the challenge right there. When I look back on my life, I can sometimes see God's purpose for my life. You see, there were reasons why God placed me in certain situations. I couldn't see them when I was there, but when you look back, I say that. Is there a reason God placed me in the home of an alcoholic father? Is there a reason God placed me? And I can remember going to a family week in a rehab program, and I can't tell you how many times over the last 40 years I've been able to counsel with people who've been through addiction programs or counsel with family members. I didn't understand all these things now, and I remember Romans 8:28, and God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. It doesn't say all things are good, okay? Don't hear me say that. We all have bad things happen to us. You've got your story, I've got mine. We could be all day and tell you all the bad things. No, so I'm not saying that. But the good is, what am I going to do as a result of those bad things? How can those things help me be a better Christian? How can those things help me help other people? I used to say, I've learned, instead of asking God why, which I always, is it okay to ask God why? You can ask God why. But you get to the point in your spiritual life where you stop asking why and you start asking God what. What do you want me to learn from this? What do you want me to do as a result of this? It's okay to ask why. You may never get your answer satisfied. But at the same time, ask God what. What do you want me to learn from this? Okay. At this pace, we'll be through about 5:30 today. Okay, so let's look at the outline. Number 1, chapters 1 and 2, Esther becomes queen. Okay, so his name was King Xerxes. He was the king of the Medo-Persian Empire. Like most kings of his time, he was a proud man who loved to put his wealth and power on display. So we held a great banquet and invited all of the leaders of the land. In fact, the banquets went on for about 6 months. And the final banquet was a continuous 7-day banquet. Someone said, I wonder if alcohol was involved. Probably so, And so when they were all in high spirits, he calls for the queen to come and dance to show her beauty before them, but she says, I'm not going in there with those drunken guys down there. And boy, it was a slap. It was a sign of disrespect. And the guy said, you're going to let her talk to you like that? So this is what happens. In chapter 1, Vashti is queen of Persia as the feast is taking place in the palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day of the feast, the king has run out of entertainment. So in order to keep his guests entertained, what does he do in Esther 1, 10, and 11? On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, that's a good verbiage. He commanded Mehum, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, and Abagtha, and Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served the presence of the Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. So he commanded Queen Vashti to come out and parade and model before all the men while they were drunk. Okay, he commanded Queen Vashti, come out and walk before us, model before us, so we can look at you. Okay, when Vashti refuses to cooperate, the king is embarrassed in front of his friends. In anger, he asks his advisors what to do. What did they tell him in Esther 1, 13 through 22? Let me read Esther 1, beginning in 13. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him, Carson, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? And then it says, not only against the king has the queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women. This is the beginning of the ERA, okay? Well, all women right here. And causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, the king commanded Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. So I'm going to stop there. So what they said is, we got to nip this in the bud before women start thinking on their own or something like that. So they decided that Vashti needs to be banished, be put in her place, taken off the throne, and then someone needs to be chosen to replace her. So that was the edict. And he looked at, you always wonder if he had regrets, because she was indeed beautiful. She was probably a beautiful woman, a great queen, but he listened to his friends. Friends, your friends can lead you astray sometimes. You need to listen to God. All right? So what plan for finding a new queen do the advisors share with King Xerxes in chapter 2, verses 2, 3, and 4? I read, Then the king's young men who attended him said, Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdoms to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa the citadel under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this pleased the king, and he did so. So you can almost see posters put up all over the land. All beautiful young women, need apply. Okay, these are the ones who need not apply. Come there, and so women from all over the land came, and they would go into the royal palace, and they would live for a year. They would get beauty treatments and cosmetic treatments. They'd be given jewelry and clothing, and then they would train for a year, and then the king would choose his new queen right there. So Esther was part of a large group of women who were trained for this purpose. They were given cosmetics and beauty treatments and jewelry, and each had the opportunity. I don't know how they did it, if he did one a day or one a week or something like that, and then said, don't bring her back. But whatever it was, the Esther was chosen, and she went willingly, and she received all the treatments right there. Esther enters the contest at the instruction of her cousin Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. Esther is a beautiful girl and is chosen to replace Vashti as queen. And what I want you to see here is this. If you read deep into that, the difference between Esther and the other girls, when they went into the king, when it was their time to go into the king, they had the choice. What makeup, what cosmetics, what dress, what jewelry. She took nothing. And she just went in by herself. And then for some reason, it said, well, we know what reason. It was God's sovereign plan that the king chose Esther among all the other women to be his queen. Okay? Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Mordecai, her uncle, he was working at the king's gate. Now, we don't know exactly what the king's gate was, but it's probably a government job. He's sitting outside the palace, and he's there. And so he is the one, he is aware now that Esther is queen. He knows all that's going on. He's got just a respectable, a blue-collar job doing something there at the king's gate. He overhears a plot by one of the officials to kill the king. And when he hears that, he quickly sends word to Esther. I've heard at the king's gate there's a plot to kill the king. Esther sends word to the king that's saying, Mordecai gave me this message. He's one of your workers at the king's gate. And the king investigates it and exposes the plot. These people are arrested and hanged, and the king survived. So that will be very important later in the book of Esther. Okay? So verses 21 through 23 say this. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus, that's Xerxes. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. So that's chapters 1 and 2. Chapters 3 and 4, we enter Haman. Haman is the bad guy, okay? He becomes the equivalent of prime minister of Persia. This position gives him the highest rank in the land next to king. Haman was a little man in a big position. He loved the attention and the honor of his new position. The question is, how did Mordecai respond to Haman? Esther chapter 3. Let me read verses 1 and 2. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. So, why didn't Mordecai bow? Okay, how did Mordecai respond to Haman? According to Esther 3:2, Mordecai would not bow down to Haman. Mordecai did not bow. Now, why? We don't know for certain. Now, the Bible says right there that Haman was promoted to the second in command. It would be like, say, the vice president of the United States. You will treat the vice president with respect, okay? So if he came walking in the room, you should treat the vice president with respect because of their position. And in military terms, you ever heard that? You salute the rank, not the person. And so when he got this promotion, it was public news that Haman was in charge. When he walked through the city gates, people acknowledged his new position. They acknowledged his promotion. They acknowledged that he was, and they bowed down to him. But Mordecai says, I don't bow, okay? And I don't know, perhaps Mordecai was a faithful Jew, and following, what was it, Shadrach, Meshach, or Daniel, they only bow to the one true God, you know? More likely, I think it's because Mordecai knew Haman. He knew he was an Agagite. He knew Haman hated him. He knew that the Agagites and the Israelites for generations and generations were bitter enemies with each other. He knew that he spit upon Jews, that he hated Jews, that he despised Jews, that he went upon them right there. And he just cringed seeing. That's the King Rob version. That's what I think. He didn't like Haman. He didn't respect him, and he couldn't believe he was there. And the last thing he was going to do was bow down to him. But the Bible doesn't say. So we don't know. But for some reason, Mordecai did not bow. Now, and this is human nature. So just say you're Haman. You're walking through the gates, and 52 people are bowing down to you, and one doesn't bow. Now, do you remember the 52 that bowed? No. You remember what? The one, like a preacher on Sundays. 52 people liked your sermon, liked your sermon, liked your sermon. One person says, preacher, we need to talk. What am I going to remember? The 52? No, I remember the one critical one who didn't like what it was, something like that. That's human nature. That's human nature. Haman, it killed him that Mordecai would not bow down to him right there. And he couldn't get over it. He could not overlook the fact that Mordecai would not bow. So when he learns that Mordecai, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Mordecai the Jew. He's a Jew. When he learned that it was a Jew, Haman used his power. Haman used his position to devise a plot, a scheme, a plan to destroy. He said, it's not enough just to get rid of Mordecai. I'm going to get rid of them all. I think I got a way to get rid of them all. Now, at this point, when you are in charge, King Xerxes, it could be just a figurehead, okay? And Haman did all the work, okay? And so Haman could get everything he wanted done, and the king would just rubber stamp it here. Just like here, I'm the figurehead. Pastor Dave does all the work around here, and so I just stamp the approvals over here right now. Pray Barb gets better quick, okay? It's getting tough working around here, And so Haman devised a plan to exterminate all the Jews, and he wrote up a law, and he sent it to the king. And to the king, there's this people. They're rebellious people. They're against your throne. There'll be a thorn in your side. Just sign this, and they won't never be a nuisance to you again. Oh, fine, go ahead. You see how it went? It went that easy and quick. And the king signed it. What the king didn't realize, he signed an edict, a command, that on a certain day, all Jewish people would be killed. Talking about a Holocaust. On a certain day, all Jewish people would be killed. This is now the official law of the land. It cannot be reversed. It's sealed by the law right there. All right? So, once again, this is one of the first attempts, long before Hitler, long before communism and this threat to annihilate the Jewish people right here. So Haman convinces the king that all the Jews in the kingdom are disloyal. So he proposes that the king set a day on which all these disloyal subjects will be exterminated, and he offers the king a bribe if he will authorize the killing of the Jews. The king signs a decree ordering the Persians to destroy all the Jews on the 13th day of the first month and to confiscate all of their property. Mordecai reads it, and he's blown away. He can't believe this has happened. So the first thing Mordecai does, he goes to the copy machine and makes a copy of this thing, and he emails it to Esther. And Esther checks her emails, and she sees it. What is this I have done? That's not in the Bible, okay. And so Esther, Mordecai sends this to Esther, say, Esther, we got to do something. Times are desperate here. Mordecai urged her to speak to the king on behalf of her people. Now, although very concerned, and although very disheartened, Esther knew that if she went into the presence of the king uninvited, it could mean certain death. When she shared this with Mordecai, something happened. So Mordecai says, Esther, this is the law of the land. You got to do something. You got to speak to the king. Now, the law was, you just couldn't go in, even though you're the queen, you didn't go into the king's chambers. You had to be summoned. You had to be summoned to go in unannounced. Well, what was to be, hey, there's a precedent set, am I right? About banishing queens, okay? To go in unannounced could be death or banishment. So Mordecai, it's not as simple. There's protocols here. I'm over here and he's over there. I just can't walk in. If I go in and I interrupt him, that's all it takes, and I'm gone. So I got to think this thing through. I just can't act. And remember when I said there comes times in life when it's not enough to believe right? You got to act. You got to do right. So when she says this to Mordecai, Mordecai says this, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. This could be the best verse in the book of Esther. But listen to Mordecai, what Mordecai said. Esther, Queen Esther, don't think for a moment that you're going to be exempt from this. Don't think for a moment that they're not going to find out your bloodline and who you are just because you're queen. You will not accept. The law is the law is the law. And if you remain silent, Esther, I believe God. I believe God will rise up someone else to deliver our people. But who knows? Could it be, Esther, that God put you in the position for such a time as this? Could it be? Could it be? Can you think of a time in your life when you were in a position, it may be a position of authority, it could be a position of decision making, a position between two people, that God put you in that position for a purpose. And if you, this is me talking here, and if you don't fulfill that purpose, I believe I'm sinning against God. God placed me here for a purpose, and I need to fulfill that purpose. So many times we bail out on God. God puts you right here. He puts everything in opportunity, everything, and you say, I'll pass. I'll pass. Oh, my friends, how many times have we missed God's calling and God's purpose in our lives right there? Okay. Man, I could preach on that. Okay, that's good. So look at the number 3, Esther's chapters 5 through 8. Esther, in contrast to Haman, has not been spoiled by her high position. Although she has become queen, she has not forgotten about Mordecai or her people. She does what she needs to do, and she demonstrates great courage. She approaches the king, but does not reveal her request. She plans it out. Friends, I don't think it's evil to have a plan, Okay, I don't think it's scheming to have a plan. If you want to witness to someone, if you want to encourage someone to become a Christian, or get someone to come to church, do a plan. Just meet with them first. You may don't bring up church the first time. Bring up this and bring up that. Invite them to lunch. It's good to have a plan and bathe that plan in prayer. So she calls a banquet. Says, and I says, King, I'd like you to come to a banquet I'll have in your honor. And by the way, invite Haman with you. So she holds a banquet in honor of the king and of Haman. And when Esther tells the king let me stop right there. I missed my place. Okay. So instead she invites to a banquet. During the banquet, the king notices that something is bothering Esther, and he asks her what he can do for her. He says he promises to grant her request even up to half of the kingdom. Esther responds by telling the king she'll make her request known the next day. Basically, come back tomorrow and I'll tell you my thing. So she has a banquet. She's buttering him up. You know, when I want to go play golf all day, the day before, man, I'll make the bed and I'll do the dishes, and then she'll at least say, "All right, what do you want? What do you want?" And so, ooh, okay, that's how she usually replies right there. And so Esther is buttering him up, has a banquet the first night, and then the king sees that something's wrong with her and said, "What's bothering you, dear? What's bothering? And tell me, and whatever it is, I'll give you half of the kingdom." And she says, "Come back tomorrow night and I'll tell you. Come back tomorrow night." I don't know why she didn't just tell him there. Seemed like that was an open door, right? But for some reason, how about God's sovereignty and God's plan? He wait another day, because it's amazing what's going to happen in those 24 hours between this banquet and the next banquet right there. And so when Haman returns home from the banquet, knowing he's already been invited to a banquet the next night, what does he do according to Esther 5, verses 9 through 12? This is Haman. "And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above all the officials and the servants of the king. And even the queen, Esther, has no one but me come with the king to the banquet." All right? So he goes home that night, and he brags about his high position and his glory and his riches, and how the king has promoted him. He goes home, it's like he's got his man cave. "Come in here. Look at friends. Look at all my plaques. Look at all my trophies. Look at all my awards. Look at this. And I'm the only one getting to go with the queen. And me and the king are going there. I've got everything I've wanted to want. I've been promoted high in the land." But look at the next thing. "With all Haman has, he will not be satisfied as long as Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate." Isn't that the way it is? We can have all the blessings in the world, but that's that one thing. That one thing, I'll never be happy. I'll never have joy. I'll never have peace. And that's when you live in greed in the world. You'll never be content. There's always one thing, always a little bit more. And I think that's what we can learn from Haman, is that Haman would never be satisfied. There was always something more. So he said, "I got to get rid of Mordecai." Look at what he says in chapter 5, verses 13 and 14. "Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife Zeresh, listen to a woman here, okay? He said, "and all of his friends." Do you remember how the king listened to his friends? Listen to his friends? Okay, and I'm not, listen to your spouse. Hear me clear. Listen to your spouse. Listen to your friends. But responsibility is up to me. Okay, I can't blame it on my spouse or my friends. I'm responsible for myself. All right, but my wife is always right. I'll tell you that. Yet this is all is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it." Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. He said, what could be better? You know what I'll do tomorrow? I'm going to have a gallows met 50 cubits high, and I'm going to go into the king and order that Mordecai be hanged from insurrection and disobedience. And then I'll go to the king's feast, and it'll be the best of best. Nothing could be better in all the world. Have you ever wondered when you think like life couldn't get any better? Be careful. Right? When you think everything's perfect, let he who thinks he stand take heed lest he fall. That's where Haman is in the story right now. So he made plans to build a gallows and have Mordecai executed. All right? So after that first banquet, Haman went home to his house and told about all of his glories and made plans to kill Mordecai the next day. The king couldn't sleep. So he calls for the royal chronicles to be read to him. And so he had people read to him, this portion, they helped him sleep, sort of like you do on Sunday mornings when I preach. I just help you sleep, And so they're reading the chronicles to him, and the portion that is read deals with the information provided to him by Mordecai about the proposed assassination plot, which led to the arrest and the execution of these kings, of his would-be assassins. Immediately, the king wants to know, what has been done to repay Mordecai for saving my life? What has been done to honor this man Mordecai for doing such a noble act? And so, as he's asking this question, Haman walks in. And so the king, Haman, I got a question for you. What should be done for the man that the king wants to honor? And wow. So talk about walking into a trap right there. He says, for some reason, Haman is sure that he was the man the king wanted to honor. So how did Haman respond to the king in Esther 6, 7 through 9? He says, and Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and let a horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Wow, So he said, King, I think you need to get a crown and put it on his head. I think you need to get a robe and put it on around his body. You need to put your horse named Ride, and you choose a servant to lead them through the city streets proclaiming, this is the man the king wants to honor. This is the man the king wants to honor. And so, can you just picture that scene? Haman comes in. He's all puffed up. The gallows are already being built for Mordecai. He's ready to go to the banquet. And the king asked him this question. He said, this is what you do. This is what you do. And you need to parade him through the street. What do you think about that, O king? And king said, that's a great idea. I want you to do all of this for a man named Mordecai. You ever heard of him? He's a Jewish man who sits down at the king's gate. You ever heard of him before? And so it's amazing that, so what is Haman forced to do? In Esther chapter 6, verses 10 and 11, he says, then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done for the man the king delights to honor. I don't know his whole heart was in it or not, but he had to obey the word of the king. So anyway, the day hasn't started off the way Haman had hoped, but then perhaps it'll get better. There is a banquet awaiting on him at night. And so he goes to the banquet, and as they're sitting down, the king says, okay, Queen Esther, tell me what's bothering you. And that's when Esther tells the king about Haman's plot, about his plan, his scheme to exterminate, to kill her, to have her, the queen, killed along with all of her people. Do you think, can you imagine Haman's eyes when he's watching Esther, his ears, not knowing that she's Jewish, not knowing all that he's saying, and realizing what's taking place right there? Let me read Esther 7, see what Haman did at chapter 7, verses 7 through 10. And the king arose in his wrath. He was furious when he heard this. He was furious. He arose in his wrath from his wine drinking, and he went into the palace garden. He had to take a walk. Yeah, I gotta just process this. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned to the palace garden, to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance of the king, said, moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king was abated. Wow. So Haman, when the king went out for a walk, he just fell at the feet of Esther, grabbed her, begged her, pleaded with her, don't do this, I'm sorry. And the king comes in and sees this display, this unacceptable display, and then he's angry with Haman right there. And so that's when he orders that Haman be hanged on the gallows instead of Mordecai. So look at this. Since I'm in the middle of page 85, since a king's decree could not be changed, Xerxes issued another decree permitting the Jews to defend themselves and slay anyone who attacks them. When this decree was signed, it was distributed throughout the kingdom, and no one dared attack the Jews. How did the Jews respond to this decree according to chapter 8, verse 17? It says, and in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edicts reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. They celebrated with a feast and had declared a holiday. Isn't that what we do that in America? We'll have a holiday, we go a national holiday, and we'll do this. And so when great things happen, it's worthy to have a holiday. And so yesterday was Martin Luther King Day. And so we have a holiday to honor the greatness and the emancipation of things like that. And so they have a holiday on that. So we're going to look at what they did. They celebrated with that holiday and great rejoicing. What I liked about it said, and many people identified themselves with the Jews because they said the fear of the Lord. There's something about those people. God is with them. God overcame them. No one dared attack them. And so I don't know how they converted. I don't know how that happened. But many people identified with the Jews at that time. So, all right. Speaking of Martin Luther King Jr., tomorrow is tomorrow EAT? Yes, tomorrow is EAT at BHC. Dr. Lydia Woods is going to do a 15-minute presentation on Martin Luther King this week at the end of that. So come and hear that. Is it Mexican? Mexican? All right. And so we're, what? Okay. A lot of space is left. So if you haven't signed up, do you call Carissa or just come? No, I'll get in trouble. Call Carissa and come. They're a fun time. If you've ever been, we eat at 5 and start eating around 5. And then around 5:45 or 6, we have a 15, 20-minute program. It's a fun time to come, and I hope you come to do that. All right? So, section 4, the Jews are delivered, Esther's 9 and 10. Mordecai became a hero in the land as a parade was given in his honor. He became great in the king's house, and fame spread throughout the land. After Haman had gallows built to hang Mordecai, what happened to Haman and his sons, according to Esther 9, 13 and 14? Haman and his sons were hanged on the gallows he built for Mordecai. Haman and his sons were hanged on the gallows built for Mordecai. And what happened to Mordecai, according to Esther 10, 1, 2, and 3? I want to read that. I'm going to read the whole chapter, if you don't mind. It may take a while. I'm going to read the whole chapter 10. King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastlines of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jews was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. That's who you want in charge, isn't it? He spoke, look at it. He sought the welfare of his people, and he spoke peace to all people. We live in a world where government leaders sometimes go out for gain and use their position for their own well-being. But that's what we pray for, leaders who will seek the welfare of the people and will speak peace for the people. So that was a Mordecai. He rose in fame and position to become the second in power only to the king of the land. So what I want you to see is that God worked through Mordecai and Esther to deliver his chosen people from the hands of Haman and his evil plot to kill them. This is a beautiful picture of the sovereignty of God at work in the world. In the book of Esther, we see God at work in the lives of individuals and in the affairs of a nation. Even when it looks as if the world is in the hands of evil people, listen to this, God is in control. Although we may not understand everything that is happening around us, we must trust God and continue to stand up for truth and what is right. Esther, who risked her life appearing before the king, became the heroine of the land. Mordecai, who was effectively condemned to death, rose to become the second highest ranking official in the kingdom. Regardless of how hopeless our situation may appear, need not despair. Say it with me. God is in control. Amen? Amen. Any questions? Richard? Okay. Well, the question, what does it mean? I don't know exactly what it means. The King's Gate, I'm thinking it's like a job, a government job. It's the only thing I could come up with. I read a couple commentaries. It was just a little, at first I thought it was a beggar, or something like that. But I think it was more of an official position. He just may be a watchman or something there. I looked at 2 different sources to get that, but I'm not positive on that. It wasn't clear. Yes, Cheryl.
Why do you think God is not mentioned in this book?
Why do you think God is not mentioned in that book? I hog the questions. Pastor Randy, will you answer that one for me? Okay. Cheryl. Never question God, okay? Never question God right there. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Woo. Wow, that was... Okay. Just a couple more minutes. I don't want that to happen again. Tom. Yeah, it's a... No, the Bible is not written chronologically. It's just, if you ever want to do something, they have a thing called the chronological Bible that you can start, and it's written. It gets confusing, especially in the Gospels. You go back and forth like that. But the Bible's not written chronological. The Bible's written for genres like that. So that's not the one. There's lots of them who are not out of order. That's not uncommon at all. Okay, a couple more. Larry. Okay. And what I learned from things like this is that someone asked me earlier today, when you stand for Christ as a Christian, you're going to be rejected in this world sometimes. You're going to be relegated. You're not going to be included. You're going to be put out for things like that. Okay, let me say a prayer. God in heaven, thank you, Lord. You're so good to us. Thank you for the peace that surpasses all understanding. Thank you for reminding us that you're God and you are in control of all things and nothing is too difficult for you. In Jesus' name, amen.